All right, good morning, everybody. Good to see you. My name is Chris, lead pastor here at the church. Privileged that you are in our community this morning. It could be a lot of different places. It's summertime, it's Sunday morning, but you're here, so thank you. Thank you so much. Grab your Bibles. We're going to be in Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We are going through a series called Under the Sun, and this is kind of the main phrase. I think it happens 29 times in this Old Testament book. Special welcome if you are online with us. Privilege that you're here. Maybe you're at the lake, you're hanging out, you got your feet up with a cup of coffee. We're just so glad that you're here. Under the sun, 29 times, it says, what is life under the sun? So this Old Testament book is really trying to put this question to you, and the question is simple, but yet it is profound. And the question is, what is your life? What is it? This is actually the question that the New Testament author, the brother of Jesus, James, asks. What is your life? Breath, or vapor, or mist. And that same idea is actually seen in this Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. What is your life? It's a breath, it's here and then it's gone. You see it and then you don't. Like that's what it is. So as we think about the totality of the human experience, there's a lot of different things that include your life. What is your life? Well, one of the parts of your life is fighting flies in the summer. I was at the library the other day working on a paper, and there was a demon fly. I was just by myself, minding my own business, and this demon fly has an agenda. And there's like 100 different people in the library, and he's just going after my head the entire time. So the entire, I'm doing this, and I finally get out my computer bag, and I'm trying to, this is a library, I'm trying to hit this fly with, and I actually thought, like, if there's like security cameras somewhere, I look crazy right now. I actually would love to get that security camera. It's part of life is a part of life is putting on sunscreen in the summer. Part of life is dealing with forest fires. Part of life is dealing with shame. How do you show up when you don't feel worthy? That's a part of life. And unfortunately, part of life, as Ecclesiastes is going to show, a part of your life, what is it? A part of your life is actually dealing with your death. A part of life is realizing that you are mortal. You are finite. You're a breath. It's here today and gone tomorrow. That is what we are going to see this morning. As we think about this new kind of digital tech age that we're living in with AI, right? AI and chat GPT. I don't know if this is familiar with you, but this is this new emerging world that is going to change the world. Chat GPT. Here's the reality. If you were to ask chat GPT or artificial intelligence, how do you feel about death? It's not going to be able to answer the question. Why? Because it's an it. It's not a thou. You are a thou. That is an it. It will not be able to answer, how do you feel about death? But if I was to ask you that question, there's a different response. How do you feel about death? You can actually speak into that, right? So as we come to the text, we're going to talk about death this morning. Oh man, it's going to be amazing. So would you stand with me? Welcome to church. Stand with me as we talk about death. There's good news, don't worry. It's bad but good at the same time. So this is Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12. It says, "Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom, and also madness and folly. What more can the king's successor do than what's already been done? I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. The wise have eyes in their heads, while the fool walks in darkness. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both. Then I said to myself, the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? I said to myself, this too is meaningless. For the wise, like the fool, will not be remembered. The days have already come and both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise also must die." Verse 17, "So I hated life, because the work that is done under the sun was grievous to me. All of it is meaningless, a chasing after the wind." So, Jesus, this sounds really depressing. And I pray that at the end of this, there would be lift. And that you, Lord, would take your place in our church and speak these words and point to you yourself as the answer to the question of life. In your name I pray. Amen. Have a seat. Thanks. Here's what we're seeing. The value of wisdom, the end of wisdom, and the vanity of wisdom. There's value, there's an end of it that he talks about, and then there is the vanity of it. So here's the value of wisdom, Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 12. We ended in 11 last week, and so we're just picking it up. If you weren't here last week, and he looked at pleasure. All right, he's like, hey, what's the organizing principle of life? I'm going to look at pleasure. So we talked about, it was really boring. We talked about alcohol, and we talked about wealth and money, and we talked about sex. So you missed a doozy last week. And then this week, he picks it up in verse 12, and here's what he says. Then I turned my thoughts to consider wisdom. Again, he's going through and experimenting. What is the organizing principle of life? How do I live? What is my life? And now he's looking at, okay, wisdom. So if you remember Pastor Tim Bussey, not last week, but the week before, he talked about wisdom. And so the author looked at wisdom. He then moved to pleasure, but he had more business talking about wisdom. So he actually returns back to how he ended chapter 1. This is the search that this king or the author has in life. How do I live it? And this is your human project. This is you. All right, this is you. How do I organize my life? As I answer the question, what is it? And so he says, I turn to consider wisdom, but also madness and folly. And so there's kind of two paths that he sees, the way of wisdom unto God and the way of madness and folly, which is just unwise, the opposite of wise, but unwise living. Behavior that is irrational, senseless, wild, and focused on the here and now, okay? Those are the two paths that he now considers. Then he says, he asks this question, what more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? Okay, there's lots of different ways that interpreters have tried to make this sentence make sense. It was originally written in Hebrew. To the English, it's very, very difficult, okay? So even as you read different translations of the Bible, they will emphasize different things because they're really not sure this idea of the king's successor, they're not sure. There's two main ways, okay? So I've done the work to distill it for you. There's two main ways that people have interpreted this. The first one is simply at the bare reading of it, all right? What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? So the whole kind of theme of the book of Ecclesiastes is found in chapter 1, verse 9, which he basically says, there's nothing new under the sun. So that's kind of what people think. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? You're not gonna come up with anything new, okay? That's basically the one understanding of this term. It's insane to think that somehow you're going to eclipse the past or come up with something brand new. They're going to do it just the same. There's nothing new under the sun. That's the first reading. The second reading, I think, has more to it. It ends the same, but there's more to it. So the king's successor, Hebrew scholars will link to Adam, our first parent in the garden, all right? Historical Adam in the garden. And what they say is, what more can Adam or the king's successor, the king being God and the successor being Adam? That's kind of the link that they make here, trying to sort out this difficult sentence in the Hebrew. And what this interpretation means is simply this, that we will behave exactly like Adam. Kind of the same. What more can the king's successor do than what has already been done? And so the author looks here at Adam as a type or a figure and says, his life will be your life. He will be the life of humans, okay? And so let's think about Adam, Genesis 1, the first book of the Bible. Here's what the Bible will say about Adam. Number one, that Adam is full of capacity, made in the image of God, and so can think and reason, commissioned to build culture, commissioned to write books, commissioned to do great things, like come up with technology and artificial intelligence and cities and all. He is absolutely capable of doing that because he's made in the image of God, he's dignified, all those sorts of things. Check. Also, at the end of Genesis chapter 3, Adam, he is going to be bent in a certain way towards folly and madness. So he is wise, and yet he's also going to be a fool. That there's gonna be things that happen to Adam that are done out of wisdom, but also done out of folly and insanity. And so what this interpretation is saying is that most people, humanity, will behave exactly like Adam, the king's successor. This will be on repeat, fully capable, dignified, love, but also full of folly. And so what this means is that, yes, you can expect both things in the world, and you can expect both things of your life, is that there will be moments of wisdom and moments of folly because of Adam, okay? So a few months ago, as I was perusing online articles, I do this often, I was introduced to a guy named Uncle Chen. Uncle Chen is a Chinese marathon runner, okay? And he completed a marathon in China in 3 hours and 28 minutes, okay? Which is a really healthy marathon time, right? But he's not setting records. So the question is, why was an entire article written about this Chinese marathon runner? The reason why he made the news was because while running this marathon in 3 hours and 28 minutes, he was also chain smoking at the same time. Not kidding you. This is Uncle Chen. Lighten up. Okay, so I'm not trying to dog on you if you're trying to quit smoking, you're a smoker. I'm not dogging on you. I'm glad you're here, okay? But we can all agree that this is very wise and very foolish all at the same time. And this is his deal. He does an ultra marathon while chain smoking the entire time. And this is what this verse is saying, is that you have both things happening at the same time. Do not be surprised you're gonna have moments of wisdom and moments of insanity all in the same life, all in the same day, all in the same moment. And this is what we can expect of the human condition, is that we are the people that say, you know what? Maybe I can live both lives. Like maybe I can on Sundays live a certain life, and then the rest of the day we live a certain way. Maybe I can do that. No, that's this. You can't do that. Maybe I can play both hands. Maybe, no, you can't. That's insane. And what is Ecclesiastes doing? The author is saying, this is what's going to happen. You can bank on it. What's already been done. Look at Adam. That's who you're going to be. Okay? That's what he's trying to say. Then he says, I saw that wisdom is better than folly, just as light is better than darkness. And so he does say there is value in it, of course. It makes more sense. Like if your Uncle Chen, stop smoking, run marathons. Like that is a better thing to do. He's not what we call a nihilist who says there's just no meaning in anything. He absolutely says there is value in living your life in a wise way. So one of the pieces of wisdom that's been given to me is this. Make decisions in your 30s and 40s that set up your 50s and 60s. Right? So live in such a way in my 30s and 40s that my 50s and 60s, I'm not broke and I have nobody around me that loves me. And Ecclesiastes would say that's a good thing. You should live your life that way. He is not saying that is not meaningful. There is value there. But we can move on to this, the end of wisdom, Ecclesiastes 2. Verse 14. He says, the wise have eyes in their heads while the fool walks in darkness. And so this is actually an ancient proverb, okay? This is actually a quotation that he pulls in, and the proverb isn't from the book of Proverbs. This proverb was kind of just out there in the world, kind of like we have a proverb, sticks and stones may break your bones, but words will never hurt me. That's the same type of thing that the writer is pulling in from his culture, and he is quoting. And so he's following up on this idea that wisdom is better than folly, okay? He says, yes, that is true objectively, but there's a massive thing here. But hold on. He starts to poke holes in it. Maybe wisdom isn't the way to organize my life, because he says, but I came to realize, in other words, my life and lived experience doesn't line up with that. It doesn't make sense. But I came to realize that the same fate overtakes them both, and this is death. So he's like, you know what? Live in such a way in your 30s and 40s that set up your 50s and 60s. That's a great thing to live. But here's the reality, is that the one who does that and the one who doesn't do that die. They end up in the same place anyway. That's what he's grappling with. The same fate overtakes them both. And so here what the author is doing is he says, both the wise and the foolish are doomed to death. It's paradoxical. He says wisdom is paradoxical because you have a fuller life, but then you still die. This is a conundrum that he finds himself in. What's the point? You all end up 6 feet under. So this past week on Monday, my kids were here for basketball camp, which, by the way, was fantastic this week. We had 56 kids, 16 leaders, and it just sounded like popping popcorn all over the church because these balls were bouncing. But let me tell you, it smelled very differently than popped popcorn around here. We introduced some of our kids to deodorant this week. Anyway, so why did I say that? Oh yeah, because they were here. My 2 older kids were here shooting hoops and stuff. And so my youngest and I, on Monday morning, my wife was working. She's a labor and delivery nurse at Royal Inland Hospital. So we decided to surprise Krista at the hospital, which is monumental for me because I hate hospitals. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. I'm sorry. I am the type of person, I can't even watch like hospital TV shows without wanting to pass out. So I go into a hospital, I feel my knees becoming weak, okay? So we bring her a coffee and a Kit Kat, and she's elated. She's just absolutely elated. Surprise, here we are. But as I'm going through the hospital, guess what I see? Sick people. Oh. Like, there's a lot of them there. Like, everywhere you look, there's sick people. And there's people in gurneys and coughing, and as I'm going through this place, a place that it's something I'm not wired for. Thinking about this text, I was like, one day this is going to be me. It's like statistically. Like, I'm going to be the one on the gurney. It's like, oh. And the author of Ecclesiastes would say, good. Think that way. Because whatever decisions you make, you're ending up on a gurney, attached to all these things that hurt, looking up at lights with your loved ones around you. That's going to be you. So in what way is wisdom appropriate? See, I think here's what he's saying. Later on in Ecclesiastes 7, the author is going to say, it is better to go to the house of mourning than it is to go to the house of dancing. Here's what he's saying. It is better for you to stand at a grave or to be in a palliative care unit of the hospital than it is for you to dance at a wedding. That's what he's saying. Why? Because he says, the wise people ask themselves, what is my life? What is this? The fools don't think that way. He says the wise do. There's value there, but he says this is where you're ending up, okay? So he says they're both doomed to die. And then in verse 16, he says the fate of the fool will overtake me also. What then do I gain by being wise? This is a paradox, okay? And then he says in verse 16, I said to myself, this too is meaningless. This is a chasing after the wind. For the wise, like the fool, will not be long be remembered. The days have already come when both have been forgotten. Like the fool, the wise too must die. This is about legacy. So you live your life in such a way, your 30s and 40s, set up your 50s and 60s. Great, wise, do that. But here's the thing. 4 generations from now, no one will remember you. Unless you're like an Ancestry.com geek, you probably don't know, or family genealogy person, you probably don't know the name of your great-great-grandfather. Probably not. I don't. Maybe that I'm bad. But this is his point. Like at the end of it, no one's going to remember whether you lived a wise life anyway. So what's the point? This is his query. What's the point of it? Right, so I did graduate work in theology, and my personality is like, I just want to do everything amazing. I want everything 100%. So I worked so hard. I graduated with a degree, and I graduated with a GPA that I was shooting for the entire time. You know what? Not one of you have ever asked me, hey, what was your GPA? I got up at 4 a.m. I emailed my professor when I didn't get as high of a grade as I wanted, saying, are you sure you marked this correctly? He emailed me back and said, you got an A. What more do you want? I was like, what more do I want? So the idea of pursuing wisdom and these things that hang on my wall, at the end of the day, he says, no one's going to remember you anyway. Whew. He says, having wisdom backfires because both the philosopher and the philanderer both die. No one's going to remember. So this ends him. This is a spiral down, okay? He's spiraling down because he now says the vanity of wisdom. He ends this by saying, so I hated life. Pastor Tim Hugenboom's going to connect this next week as he talks about work. But I want to borrow this because this is the end of it. So I hated life. Because he says, every card I play will be trumped by death. The other way you can understand it is like, so I was disgusted with life. So this isn't this kind of clinical depression thing. This wasn't written with that idea here. But I think for some of you who are feeling the darkness, can I just say the Bible links with your world? Because this is a person who does the query and says, so I hated life. Like, for those people who look at the Bible as just like some pie in the sky when you die type thing, no, this is real. I hated it. I was just disgusted with this existence. What do I do? And this really is the entirety of, there's some people that just despise this book because it's him just coming to this dead end every single time. Dead end, dead end. It's not in pleasure, it's dead end, dead end. This guy, the author hates life. It seems that life has played a trick on him. Oh, maybe it's pleasure. That's not it. Oh, wisdom. No, that's actually meaningless too. So what's the way forward? The way I see it, there's 4 ways forward. Let me go over them with you. The key question we need to ask ourselves is this: what story do you find yourself in? You are storied people. Everybody is. To say there is no story is a story itself. Do you understand that? It's important. What story do you find yourself in? With that question, that query, let me give you, I believe, 4 different options of the way forward. We're all die anyway. What's the point? Okay. Here's the first option. The option, number 1, is just to say, you know what? God doesn't exist then, and I can do whatever I want. Life is meaningless. There is no purpose, and I do whatever I want. And that's, in the marketplace of ideas, that's a viable option. So I query this one, I biopsy this option, because contrast is the mother of clarity. Do you understand that? That's a saying by Os Guinness. He's a Christian thinker. Contrast is a mother of clarity. So let's look at this first option. Maybe you should live as if God does. I'm not promoting that. You're like, hey, I went to church this morning, and the pastor said that you should live as if God does. I'm not saying that. But contrast is the mother of clarity. Here's one of the options, okay? And for the voice of this, or the representative of this, I'm going to quote a guy. His name is Bertrand Russell. You're like, why are you quoting Bertrand Russell in church? He's an atheist. Because contrast is the mother of clarity, okay? So here's Russell in 1903. Okay, Russell is an atheist. He wasn't a nihilist, but he was an atheist. Prominent, one of the most prominent atheists in the West. And he's just said, you know, let's just live as if God doesn't exist. So in 1903, he writes this. It's long. I'll make commentary as we go along. Bertrand Russell says in A Free Man's Worship that man is a product of causes, so humanity, you, me, women, whatever, is a product of causes which had no prevision. So you are the product of nothing that is significant or transcendent. There is no vision for your existence. Man is a product of causes which had no provision of the end they were achieving. That is his origin, growth, hopes, fears, loves, beliefs are the outcome of accidental collocations of atoms. You are an accident, okay? That's what it says. You're an accident. That no fire, no heroism, no intensity of thought or feeling can preserve an individual life beyond the grave. In other words, you're going to die. This is the author of Ecclesiastes. You're going to die. No heroism. You're going to end up in the same place. That all the labors of the ages, all the devotion, all the inspiration, all the noonday brightness of human genius are destined to extinction in the vast heat of the solar system. All of your love, all of your life, all of your good, everything will just crumble and collapse in the vast heat of the solar system. That's it. It doesn't move on from here, okay? This is what he's saying. And that the whole temple of man's achievement must inevitably be buried beneath the debris of a universe in ruins. This is Russell. All these things, if not quite beyond dispute, are so nearly certain. So he says it's not for sure, but you can bank on it, that no philosophy which rejects them can hope to stand. In other words, the wise person who asks the question, what is my life, will simply realize that this is all there is. You are an accident. There is no purpose, that everything that you do in life will collapse in the eternity of the ruin of the universe. And he ends, only within the scaffolding of these truths, only on the firm foundation of unyielding despair can the soul's habitation henceforth be safely built. This is Russell, okay? Option 1, we all die. What do? God doesn't exist. None of this means anything anyway. But while you're here, do as much good as you can, but know that at the end of it, it's for nothing, okay? That's an option. Now, if you read other stuff of Russell, he's vigorously pursuing justice. He's vigorously pursuing relieving of suffering, all these things. So he's not a nihilist. Russell says, no, there is stuff that you can do, but let's just be honest. He is an honest atheist. That's what I'm trying to point out, okay? That's option 1. Option 2, not like Russell, is to just say this. Is to just say, you know what? I don't believe there is a God. I'm not really sure. I'm not gonna do the inquiry. I'm not gonna search anymore for this. But I don't believe there's a God. I am gonna live as if he doesn't exist, but I wanna do as much good as I possibly can. I wanna be a good person. I wanna do successful things. I was listening to a leadership guru talk about what's the purpose of his life, and verbatim, he said, the path I have chosen is one of positive legacy. Is to bequeath to my kids as much as I can and to add value to the world and contribute to the world. And so I would say, great, that's fantastic. But he goes on to say, you know what, I don't believe there's a God, but this is what I want to do. And so it's not as far as Russell, because these people want to be a good person and they want to contribute to the world. And I would say as a Christian, thank you, that is good. We need contributors. But here's the problem. Think of the game of Monopoly. When you play Monopoly, and you pass go, that means a lot. You get $200. And when you play Monopoly, you can buy and sell properties. Oh, I got the boardwalk. It matters, right? You try to get that money. You distribute that money, and the $500 piece of paper and the $100 piece of paper matter, because the more 500s you have, the better. It's great. But here's the thing, is that when the game of Monopoly ends, none of it matters. Because the $500 piece of paper and the $100 piece of paper are all the same. You don't actually have it. It collapses in on itself. And this is the difference between localized meaning and eternal meaning. And the people that just say, look, I'm just gonna be 6 feet under at the end of all things, it doesn't really matter, but while I'm here, I'm gonna contribute. The reality is, like Russell said, it doesn't matter. No one will remember 3 generations from now anyway. And if you do bequeath all your wealth to your kids, they may squander it anyway. And all of your goodness and all of your legacy will maybe be forgotten by the next generation or the one after that. So why does it matter? It's the difference between localized meaning and eternal meaning. And I believe both Russell, option 1, and this option don't work. It may feel good, but if you think about it and ask the question, what is my life? You want more than that. So here's option 3. So what? Here's the third option. Number 1 is that you realize that Jesus is the wisdom of God. Okay? No time to unpack this, but in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, in a really brilliant way, to two very different groups of people and how they think. Here's what Paul says. Christ is the power of God and the wisdom of God. So it's not just about having pithy statements like, whatever you do in your 30s and 40s, set up your 50s and 60s. What Paul is doing, he says, look at Jesus. Because you see both the personification of wisdom in his life and also the brilliance of God in sending him to you. Both are happening. So without Jesus as the wisdom of God, the wisdom now is live your life, live your best life. Don't think about death. Think about I'll deal with it when it comes. Be your own God. Live as if he doesn't exist. But here's what this means. If Jesus is the wisdom of God, that wisdom derived independently or even in opposition to God is no wisdom at all. It's a life of madness, a chasing after the wind. It may help you for a decade, but it carries no eternal significance. So the path here is to see Jesus as the wisdom of God and interact with him for the question of what is your life? Because he has answers. And if you query your life, you're going to quickly understand that your life is full of capacity and dignity and beauty, and there's legacy and there's positive things, but there is also foolishness and regret and disappointment and failure and divorce and addiction and mess. And where do you go to take that? How do you deal with that? The story that you tell yourself about your life. In the book of Ecclesiastes, in chapter 3 or 11, he says, he has also set eternity in the human heart. Eternity in the human heart. And so he answers his own question by saying, look, what's the deal? How do I move forward? It's not in pleasure, it's not in wisdom. How do I move forward in this? And the answer is, he has set eternity in your heart. That you have a homing device in your soul unto the wisdom of God found in Jesus. And that is the end of your search. And nothing and no one and no piece of wisdom will be able to be the guiding principle of your life and deliver on what you want and need, both now and forever. Secondly, this is the third option, that Jesus has solved the problem of death. See, the wisdom of God found in Jesus, as you orient your life, as Jesus comes as the operating principle of your life, you see someone who also died. And so at the fulcrum place of my faith is a death. There's life, but there is a death. And so what Christians believe is that Jesus has solved the problem of death. By his own sacrificial death for your folly, for your madness, for your believing that he doesn't exist and you can live as however you want. He has died for those things and died for your sin and your rebellion on a cross, that he's died the death that you should have died. And so the question is, how do you deal with your death? How do you deal? Everybody is dealing with their mortality in some way. In 2002, famous baseball player Ted Williams died. After his death, 2 kids of his produced a paper that they signed in 2000. And the note said that the 3 of them, his 2 kids and Ted Williams, a baseball player, made a pact that when they died, that they would have their bodies frozen in hopes that someday science would be advanced enough to bring them back to life. That's how Ted Williams dealt with his death. So after his death, these kids brought their father's body, flown to Scottsdale, Arizona, where his body was hung upside down in a steel tank full of liquid nitrogen at minus 325 degrees. And he placed his hope in science that one day he would live again. But here is the hope for those who follow Jesus. That your life and the worst thing of death is never the last thing. Because at the resurrection of Jesus, the promise of eternal life is found. And that he has set eternity in your heart, and it's found in him. And so what that does, and I'm going to end, what that does, to the degree that you align your life with Jesus and see his sacrificial death and his victorious resurrection, and that is a guiding principle of your life, it brings enormous meaning into these days under the sun. Because it's not just localized meaning, but your life has eternal significance. Because why? It is not yours. It is unto the Lord. And so the things that you do here will not collapse at the end of all things, but actually have eternal significance. And if all you do is you want to live localized, you want to bequeath your stuff and I'll be a good person, but live as if God doesn't exist, my guess is that you're just going to have a life focused in on you. But here's what Jesus does, is it orients the human heart outward. So there's a book written by a priest. He's deceased, called The Music of Eternity. This priest, his name is Adrian Van Kam, and he asks a volunteer nurse who cares for lepers a question. And here's what her response is. Adrian asked, I asked her, this nurse, if she likes what she was doing, looking after lepers. She answered, liking is not the right word. I feel appalled by the dirt, stench, and disfiguration of the patients they carry in from the bush. Often I feel like running away, but I stay for the love of God. I try to see Christ in their fractured bodies. Do you see how the death of Jesus informs her life now? I see death, but Christ in their fractured bodies. This helps me to honor them with full attention in the midst of filth, groans, despair, and death. In this sense, yes, I love my work, but I cannot as yet say that I like it. How do you live that life? A life of meaning in the face of death. Jesus' death and resurrection is the answer to the human question of what is my life and how do I organize it? The fourth option, very quickly, is to try to live both lives, one unto God and one unto yourself. And here's the thing, you won't do either. So Jesus, meet us here in the midst of so many questions and these big philosophical questions of life and meaning and hope and purpose. Meet these people and me, that we would be wise people who think about things and make decisions and ask ourselves the questions that matter. And so we sing again, Christ, our hope in life and death. In your name I pray, amen. Let's stand and sing.